Hello and welcome to today's COSIDA Capital One Listening and Leading webinar. We are pleased to offer discussion on statistic management techniques, specifically the NCAA and NAIA record-keeping policy adjustments during the current COVID-19 pandemic. We appreciate you joining us today. Before we begin, we'd like to say a quick thank you to our corporate partner, Capital One, presenting sponsor of our continuing education series. As a reminder, the webinar will be posted later today on COSIDA.com and also in COSIDA Connect, which is our membership's online community. We'll also save this as a podcast, and you'll be able to download it from the services listed on COSIDA.com. We'll also place this webinar on the COSIDA YouTube channel. Today's webinar will rely on your questions. Please ask your questions as we want to hear from you and what's on your mind. Please use the chat box, which you'll find on the right side of the portal. We'll save time during the webinar and at the end of this webinar to address them. Please send them to us now, and we'll get to them later. We'll address as many of those as time allows. Today's webinar, we'll bring in each of our presenters individually. They're going to have different aspects of all of this they're going to talk about. We've got representatives from the NCAA. We've got David Warlock, the Director of Media Coordination and Statistics, Sean Strazaskar and Jennifer Rogers, who are both Associate Directors of Media Coordination and Statistics. And we also have Brad Cygan, the Director of Athletic Communications for the NAIA. We will work in questions as appropriate. The rest we will hold for the end of the webinar. So to start off, we'll like to bring on David Warlock, who's going to talk about the SID community and the workloads and challenges and all the different scenarios we're considering that we might be facing as we start up our next academic year. David?
Thanks, Clark. It's great to be with you all today and appreciate everyone out there for taking time to participate on this call. It's obviously an unprecedented time in our history as a country and certainly within athletics communications. And we know the challenges that you're currently faced with and the potential challenges that lie ahead. And with that, our staff is working on contingency plans in case there are more unprecedented times in terms of our workload. And specifically what we're talking about and what we're thinking about as a staff would include a late start to the fall sports season, and if those were to lead over into the winter sports or even the spring sport. We've seen some people suggest that football could be played, for example, in the fall. So we understand that's going to be taxing on our end, but that's just a fraction of how it will be on several sports information staffs across the country. If, for example, we had fall sports, winter sports, and even spring sports for those sports like baseball and softball that are starting in early February, all going on at the same time. And so we want to be completely prepared for that scenario should it play out. We hope that it doesn't, and we're optimistic that it won't, but we don't want to be caught flat-footed in the event that we have scenarios where we have multiple seasons going on against each other. We're used to it on some level, of course, because basketball certainly bleeds into lacrosse and baseball, softball season, but this could be something of unparalleled comparison, and so we just want to be prepared for that. And we're going to think of some ideas on how we can help, and we don't have anything definitive in place by any means, but one of the things we want to get across in today's webinar is we want to hear ideas from the COSIDA membership and how they would like to see things play out. Do we eliminate daily statistic updates for some sports? Do we just go to once a week or maybe twice a week? Do we do anything to help with anything we can do to help with the workload of the sports information staffs at all three divisional levels is something we want to be a part of in terms of coming up with solutions. And so today we're not here to outline any of those solutions, but we want you to think in terms of how you wish to attack this, because especially in the one or two person shops, how you're going to handle that is going to be tricky, to say the least, and we want to be helpful in that regard, and so we're open to your suggestions on those matters. The other thing we want to talk about and make sure everyone is aware of are the statistical plaques. The plaques are something that people have been in the business are very fond of, whether it's an SID or a coaching staff member, administrative member, or obviously the student athletes. Unfortunately, just like everyone on campuses and in conference offices across the country, we are faced with some difficult budget related decisions. And one of the things that's going to be in place for the 2021 academic year will be a reduction in the plaque program that we have. We are going to still provide individual champion plaques to student athletes during the fall, winter, and spring 2021 academic year. We are not, however, providing the team plaques, nor are we providing the second individual plaque that the school typically has. We are, however, are going to offer the school the opportunity to purchase the plaque. I believe they're around $80 or so per plaque. So we wanted you to be aware of this. This is going to save our staff, several $1,000s to say the least. And it's unfortunate, but it was something we had to do to contribute to the NCAA's across the board budget reduction, which is going to total in the hundreds of millions of dollars. So every department was impacted by this, and media coordination and statistics not excluded from that. And so that was one of the areas in which we were able to make sacrifices. It's not something we want to do. It's not something we want to continue moving forward after the 2021 season. But we thought it was important to make you all aware of that this year and well in advance. And also, again, remind you that schools will have the opportunity to purchase a plaque, and you can contact any of us on the media coordination statistics staff for information on how to do so. Clark, I'll turn it over back to you.
Great, that sounds great. Excellent information there for David. This time, we're going to bring on Sean Straziskar. Sean's going to talk a little bit about NCAA LiveStats and the process of the progress of that project to this point. Sean?
Thanks, Clark. Hope everyone is doing well today. I'm just going to do a quick 8 to 10 minute talk about what we're currently working on, how things have gone with NCAA LiveStats. Jeff Williams from our staff is our main contact as far as our new software goes, but certainly any one of our staff members can field your questions, and if we don't know the answer, we'll certainly get it for you. We'll start with soccer and volleyball. The fall didn't start as smoothly as we had hoped with the introduction of the LiveStats for soccer and volleyball. The stats application itself worked really well, the game application. Most of the issues had to do with backwards compatibility files and some integrations from the Genius statistics engine into the NCAA database. The Genius team was very responsive, quickly fixed those bugs that were reported by the users and our staff. And it's really important that we do hear from the users. That's how we catch, almost all of the bugs that software has. So don't sit on it, send it to one of us, and we'll make sure and get that passed on to the people who can fix it. We're extremely pleased with the number of first-year adopters in both soccer and volleyball. We had about 51% across all divisions for men's soccer that used it, 54% for the women's soccer, and just around 48% for women's volleyball. So we expect those numbers to increase next year, and we're in a good place now. We ended the year a lot better than we started it, and we are ready to go with that for next year. Basketball, in its second full season, had a really good season as far as the software goes. Over 68% across all 3 divisions used the application in men's basketball. 67% in women's basketball were scored in NCAA LiveStats. Last year, only about 31% of the games were scored in that application, so it's a big increase. Of the 68% of users, 84% of those were Division I games. So Division I really jumped in with both feet. Divisions 2 and 3 also saw a big increase, 66% of Division 2 and 51% of Division 3. We saw a big decrease in the number of errors in the files that we've gotten in the past, and reporting, as far as getting reports on time, went way up since we started using the NCAA LiveStats. Hockey is led internally by Mark Beddix. Mark does a great job for our staff and is really in tune with the hockey community. Beta testing started this past season. It was used in over 100 games for this past season. And we really need to thank all of those who participated and really grasped this and made it their own. Your feedback has been invaluable. Genius developers are working closely with the group that Mark put together. And we're looking at a go or no-go decision whether the product will be ready for full use in the 2021 season by around late June, early July. It's in a really good place right now. If anyone would like to see the product, feel free to reach out to Mark. As soon as the working group is comfortable with the software, there will be numerous training opportunities. Football, internally, we're led by Phil Pierce and Jeff Williams both. Football is a different animal as far as statistics go, as many of you know. It's in its final stages of testing. The main aspects of the application that are still being tested revolve around backwards compatibility, generating pack files for StatCrew integration, and StatCrew style XML files. This testing is set to take place starting next week. A decision for the rollout for the 2020 fall season, next season, will be made about that same time frame as hockey, maybe a little bit later. So June spilling into July, and we'll communicate that to the membership as soon as that is made. We're going to be very conservative before rolling out football. We understand the importance of getting it right and are really aware of the complicated nature of the sport. Managing rosters with 150 players, trying to correctly capture every possible situation that can come up in the football game. So we're going to be very careful on that rollout. Our staff is going to think long and hard and make sure that the working group is very comfortable with it, plus the developers that we have working on the Genius side, plus our IT staff. If you're interested in learning more about the LiveStats application, there are 2 training webinars scheduled for later in May. One is scheduled for Thursday, May 21st. That's at 3 o'clock Eastern. And the other is scheduled for Wednesday, May 27th at 11 o'clock Eastern. You can always access the most recent training webinar and find the latest announcements by going to NCAAmanager.com. And from there, you go ahead and click on the Know More tab. Throughout the summer, there'll be several opportunities to participate in training for all of the sports that have been rolled out. And more detail will be announced on those webinars when those are set. Lastly, if you have any questions, want to set up training for you, a conference, or a group, feel free to reach out directly to the support team at Genius. They can be reached at ncaaSupport@geniussports.com. I would encourage everyone to do that. We've had really good feedback on those who have done those training sessions. And as usual, if you have any concerns, questions, ideas on how we can improve this, please don't hesitate and send them to any one of our staff. Thanks.
Sean, before you depart here, we've got a couple of questions that have come in that I think are appropriate for you to answer.
Okay.
One centers, you just mentioned the need to be cautious with football. Is there a timeline in place, a goal timeline for the baseball softball product?
Not right now. We don't have a hard timeline on that. We are currently working hard through the 2 that we're focusing on internally. I will say that baseball is currently being worked on by developers at Genius Sports. And we do have a working group that's going to be probably led by Jeff again, and we'll probably have another member of our team on there. But we do not have any hard dates right now for baseball. It will not be in the 2020 2020 season. I do know that.
Okay. And we also have a question regarding when career reports might be available within the Genius platform.
You know what? I don't know that answer. To tell you the truth, if one of my colleagues is on that does know that answer, feel free to chime in. I would hate to give you a false information on that. Dave, would you happen to know that?
I don't know, but we'll find out. I don't even know if our staff is fully aware of that, but it's obviously something that it continues to be a priority.
Okay, great. Next, we're going to turn things over to Jennifer Rogers. Jen's going to talk about the policies that the statistics staff has put together in response to all the different situations we're now finding ourselves in. Jen?
Thank you very much. So we know that we've been in a unique position with some of our stuff, especially with spring. So I'm going to touch on winter first. I think that's a little easier to go through, but then obviously as you have questions, I've seen some in the chat already. We'll try to get to all of those, but I'm going to give you a high level look at the document that we put together that was linked. If you need to find it, it is in our stats policies, and it is in Appendix B, which I think starts on page 30. So as you know, we finalized all winter sports, even though all games were not played. We're going to treat it as a completed season. Where it got a little bit tricky is with some of the championship records. So we really tried to sit down and look through each championship to determine how we would count those in our records books and how we would treat those from an appearance standpoint. So for example, if the championship began and tournament games took place, we're counting all stats and win-loss records, and we'll put that towards all-time championship records. So an example would be Division III basketball, where some games were played even though the tournament was not completed. So teams will have a tournament appearance and a win-loss record. There will not be a champion, obviously, or anybody that's given any sort of third place or anything like that, but we do have win-loss records. So an example like Division II basketball, we had a bracket announced, but no games were played. Everything was canceled the day those games were scheduled to start. So we thought it was appropriate, because the bracket was out, to go ahead and credit teams with a tournament appearance, but obviously there will not be any sort of win-loss record since no games were played. And then we had some sports where the brackets weren't even announced yet. So the example there would be Division I basketball. No teams are credited with appearances, even if they had already clinched a conference AQ and earned the tournament spot. We still don't think it's appropriate to do that, since it's not consistent across every division, every conference. So tournament appearance streaks for championships that were not selected will not end, but it doesn't count. 2020 does not count as an extension of that streak. So an example would be Notre Dame women's basketball. Their streak of 24 straight tournament appearances will still be 24 in the 2021 season. Then when it gets really tricky is with the individual sports. So we had Division III's swimming and diving going on. We had track. So if the championship began and individual events were completed fully, those first place individuals are listed as an NCAA champion, but we did not complete any tournament totally. So there are no team champions recognized overall in those events. Obviously, if you have specific questions, we have created a grid where we show the sport, where it stopped, at what point they were in the tournament, and all of that. So you're welcome to reach out to any of us, and we can give you more information if you have questions about your specific team and maybe their appearance in a tournament. So moving on to spring, that's where it gets interesting. We did have some teams that had played quite a few games, especially in baseball and softball. However, we think it was a third or less of the season that was actually completed for everybody. So we're not awarding stat champions or recognizing national stat champions in our records books. We are not including averages, percentages, or per game, single game categories or single season categories. What we are recognizing are single game accomplishments, so that wouldn't change regardless of the number of games played. So we will include those in our records books. And we will include individual stats towards career totals. I know that was a question in the chat, but yes, we are including that in career totals, even if that means a student athlete will have 5 or possibly 6 seasons. Championship records are easy. We weren't to that point yet, so there is nothing for us to really report there. From a coaching record standpoint, we are going to include all records for winter and spring towards a coach's career record. And we will count it as a year coach too, even though we might have had some spring teams where they had only played a couple of games. We did have a few questions about streaks and how to handle that. It's tricky. I know we had some teams that have 40 season winning streaks on record, but maybe they were 4-7 when the season was stopped. As a staff, we went back and forth on this. We've talked about, it's not obviously fair to recognize it as a full season, but we are counting it towards the coach's record. So we do feel like the streak does come to an end, although it should definitely be denoted. And I think schools can handle it on an individual basis if they, however they want to in their records books. The other thing we have in this document, if it's helpful for you, is we have some footnote wording. So things that you can use for your records books or media guides, if that's helpful, if you want to copy it out. So for example, you could say the 2020 championship was not completed due to the COVID-19 pandemic. We have some other things in there for spring as well. And I'm going to look at the chat real quick to see what else was in there. Let's see. So the question about using lower minimums for spring records, I would let Sean and Dave weigh in on this as well, but I think that's going to be up to you on what works for your records book and what fits best. I mean, we're not going to count those per game averages and stuff in our records book. So I don't know if you want to stay consistent on a campus level, but I think that's going to be up to you. And maybe you can determine how much of your season was completed before you make that determination. And let's see. Not sure. I think I'll go ahead and toss it back. I'll look through here and see if there's any others. But obviously, if you guys have questions, like Dave and Sean both said, reach out to any of us. We're happy to help however we can.
Jen, we do have a couple of things I think we can address now, just in terms of, I think there's a couple of folks looking for some clarification on some things. Okay. Speaking specifically to the Division II swimming and diving championships, yep. Events that had preliminaries completed but not finals. Yep. Are those results thrown out, or are those considered finals? What is being done with those?
We are still touching base with the sport liaison for each of those to determine, but I think that the feeling right now is that since it didn't progress to the final round or the final event, we're still in prelims, that would not be considered final. I don't know if Dave's heard any more on that, but I know that's something we were still discussing.
No, Jen's exactly right. If it didn't reach a point of conclusion, then it won't count as a championship.
Okay. And could you talk a little bit more about the decision not to include individual season averages, even if players had met statistical minimums that are established in the record books?
It's just an effort to be consistent. I mean, obviously, a lot of teams played several games, and for example, in baseball, softball, Southern schools typically played well more than Northern schools, but we wanted to be consistent on that, and even across different sports.
Okay, that sounds great. At this time, we're going to turn things over to Brad Cygan at the NAIA. He's going to talk a little bit about some of the key differences in how NAIA has managed their statistical policies and why they've made some of those alterations. Brad?
Yeah, thanks, Clark. And obviously, I think this is a time that we really had to be very careful with the decisions we made. Not only make them quickly, but make sure that that we consulted the right people too. So all the decisions we made as we move forward, we did in consultation with with NAIA CIDA, their stats committee. Wanted to make sure that everyone was being consulted on that before we took it to our National Administrative Council for approval. But really what we had to do is we had to look at things from just a fairness perspective and a little bit of consistency perspective too, about how not only we wanted to handle things, but how NCAA was handling things as well, trying to be fair to collegiate student athletes across the board. I think there's really only one adjustment that we really made from what NCAA had done, but I think the first thing we really thought about were winter sports and how were we going to attack that. The main thing that we wanted to do first and foremost is make sure that appearances could be counted. So any appearances, even like Jen said, that for NCAA that were anything that was announced that we had announced any selections or qualifiers, we wanted to make sure that those appearances absolutely counted in the record book. So that was one of the first things that we did. We're pretty much the same thing down the board with win-losses, with anything that was played out in our championships. No champions are being crowned in the NAIA of a championship that was not completed. So that was important to us as well. No sense in trying to reinvent the wheel there. Spring, we really came into some tough decisions in terms of how we wanted to attack this. And really, I think the hardest piece for us was to eliminate those season average records, those season, not about season totals, but the season averages. So your ERA average, those we felt there weren't many schools that had eclipsed that 50–60% of their season in order to kind of justify something a little bit more drastic on our end. So we wanted to make sure that we had consistency across the board. So that was one of those that we decided early on, let's take that to the NAC. We don't recommend that we move forward with keeping those statistical averages in the record books. But in terms of single game records, single game totals, things like that, we decided to keep all of that. And really the only difference we made, and this really came from not only our NAI side of board, but it also came through the NAC, is that we didn't feel it was right to do any career records with an asterisk in it. We're going to keep all career records whether they play 4 or 5 years, similar to what NCAA is doing, but we didn't want to add an asterisk. There's a lot of disparity in terms of how many games you play, and you get an opportunity to play based on the success of your team throughout a career. So we didn't feel like everyone's playing 40–45 games a season, and depending on the sport. So we didn't really want to add that into the mix. So we are not going to do an asterisk on any of those career records, and we feel that's fair to let those records stand. Really, I think the main thing we're really getting into now is how to tackle fall. I think we're looking at several different options that our council of presidents and the NAC are weighing in terms of delayed starts, things like that. So we have been talking to DAC-Stats to make sure that we're talking about some of these issues that could come up if we've delayed into a spring situation where we've got fall, winter, and spring going on at the same time. So it is something that we're having active, because in fact I spoke to them this morning about it as recently as a couple of hours ago, in terms of what it's going to look like for their IT department to handle the additional server issues that it could prompt with being able to sync your stats. So we're looking at all that. We're also trying to figure out a good way to help train others on an athletic staff in order to do stats. One thing we're hearing from athletic directors is they're probably more comfortable moving forward with any sort of delays and trying to figure it out within their staff to be able to handle some of these extra things that they're going to happen, such as stats. If we've got 6 or 7 games, ADs understand that you're going to have to be at 1 or 2 of those, but you can't be at everything. So we want to help provide resources to people that ordinarily don't do stats. So we know we're gonna have to do that, and we're starting to work on those solutions. But those are the types of things we're working on right now, in addition to some mergers of our record books from Division II and Division I basketball, with that merger coming up next year. So we're kind of handling a lot of things from that perspective.
Thank you very much, Brad. We did have a question about cross-association compatibility. NAIA schools playing at NCAA venues where NCAA LiveStats is being used, and then trying to import those files into DAC-Stats and some of the things that have run into that. What kind of progress is being made on that front?
Yeah, the DAC-Stats is working, trying to figure out some of those issues. They're trying to work on that alongside Genius. I think there's always going to be some compatibility issues. They're doing their best on it. Some of those questions will probably be on the Genius end too, of how they're able to help DAC-Stats and get those files in in a better way. I know in the past with Stat Crew, they were able to work with Stat Crew to get some of those things ironed out. I don't know exactly how communication is going with DAX, and Genius, so I don't know how much I can answer that, but I do know they have been communicating and they're aware of those issues.
Okay, and with regard to some of the policies that Jen mentioned for the NCAA, is the NAIA's approach to a number of years coached by coaches records, streaks of winning seasons. Are you applying similar policies toward how those are counted?
Yes, absolutely. We're taking the same approach that the coaches wins will be counted throughout our championships and through the end of the regular season stoppage of spring sports. So since the stats are going to remain intact, we felt it was only fair for the coaches' records to remain intact as well, and that creates that consistency.
Okay, great. We do still have some time for some questions, so if users want to get those in, they can feel free to do so. We do want to bring the NCAA folks back up. We do have a question here about LiveStats, and the question is regarding how schools might be able to help backfill some of their historical data and records within the LiveStats platform, such as days before the single game XML uploads were available. Is that something that's on the radar of Genius at this point?
Yeah, there will be a way for them to do that at some point, but right now the focus has been to get the applications where they're working as far as game applications go, season reports, conference reports. But yes, it is on their radar, but that is not going to be their main focus at this point.
Okay, that's great. We're trying to just go through and make sure that we've answered everybody's questions here. I think we're all set. David, you mentioned, is there an email address that people should use, or what means should they use to get in contact with you all with general questions or things that come up after this webinar that maybe people aren't thinking about right now? Would you mind turning your microphone on, David? We are not hearing you. If Sean or Jen wants to jump in with that.
Jump in, yeah, no problem. So we do have a generic email. It's NCAAstats@ncaa.org. You're welcome to send questions there, or then you can reach out to any of us. I know a lot of you have our contacts based on what division you are in or what sports you've been working with. So even if you don't know the exact person to contact, just reach out to one of us and we can either answer your question or we'll pass you along to the right person.
Okay, and Brad, same question for you. Is there a means for folks to get questions to you after the fact?
Yeah, you can email me directly, bcygan@nai.org, or you can email anyone on our communication staff, Katie Green or Maddie Westergaard. They can help you get the answers that you're looking for.
Okay, we do have another question about LiveStats, and regarding the pricing, the phasing in of a pricing model. Is that timetable still in place, or has that been pushed back in response to all of this?
Are you back on, Dave?
Can't hear you.
We are not hearing you, David.
I don't know the answer to that question as far as the timetable goes. Jen, I'll defer to you if you have any idea on that.
So I don't think a decision has been made beyond that 3-year period, and obviously some of the things that we probably would have been talking about right now are different because of the situation that we're in. So I know it's something that we have on our list to talk to the Genius folks the next time we all get together and have a staff meeting once I think decisions are made on football and on hockey as well.
Okay, and for folks who have specific questions about Genius, is the school and conference manager still the best way to funnel those to Genius?
Yep.
would start there. And then you can also email our staff, and if our staff can answer the question, we certainly will. If we need to pass it on because it's more complex, we can do that also.
Okay, great. Thank you very much. I think that's going to conclude today's webinar. We'd like to thank everyone for joining what was a very informative session today. And a big thank you to our presenters for their guidance on record keeping and historical files during what are certainly challenging times for college sports and sports in general. As a reminder, you can find the on-demand webinar on CoSIDA.com and CoSIDA Connect later this afternoon. It will also be in a podcast format and will be on our CoSIDA YouTube channel. We'll have all the links for each of those on the CoSIDA website, CoSIDA.com. Stay tuned for more webinars and professional development sessions in the month of May. We'll be releasing that schedule soon, as well as a schedule for the virtual convention, which will be taking place in June. Thanks again for joining us. Stay safe and have a good day.
Thanks, everyone.